the current team principal had been fired that morning. The company had been brought together, and this is, Christian Horner, he's now going to be the new team principal. And there was a sort of a look of shock as I looked out at this sea of faces and thinking, who's this kid that they've left me? So I went back to, what was my office. I had a secretary in tears because her previous boss had just been fired. I got his Christmas cards on the desk, his coffee cup half drunk. And it was like, okay, so this is the start. Wow. This is the start. And a pretty disgruntled workforce that all went home at 5 o'clock. I think in protest. Well, high performance is everything that we do. Obviously, ultimately, it is the car, but generating and focusing your performance into all aspects that contribute that is everything that we're about. So it's getting the most out of people, being the best that you can be, focusing on your, understanding where your weaknesses are, understanding where your strengths are. It just encompasses all aspects, of competition and life in many respects. I suppose you have to focus on your weaknesses, because I think that by understanding where your weaknesses are, it only adds to your strengths. And I think even with a race that you win, there's things that you can do better. There's always something that you can improve. You're always learning. Life is a journey at the end of the day. And a motor race is a 2-hour snapshot of that, and there's always something that you can learn, that you can improve, that you can do better, and then you carry that knowledge, that know-how, into the future events. Well, I started, my journey, as it were, with a desire to be a racing driver. I was always fascinated by speed. Speed and whether that was making a go-kart to go down the hill at the back of the house, whether it was one of those Evel Knievel, wind-up toys that you build a ramp and see how far he could jump. It was, how many bricks could you build a ramp and how far could you jump on your own BMX. So speed was always something that I was fascinated by. Then I discovered the world of kart racing, of go-kart racing, and it was my mum's fault, because I plagued my father to get a motorized go-kart that was to drive around the garden. And I think he'd had a bit of enough of me going on and on about it. And it was my 12th birthday was coming up, and there was a local newspaper in Leamington Spa. And my mum found in one of the adverts at the back of it an old go-kart that was for sale. It was about 40 quid or something. Right. And she bought it for me for my birthday. And it turned out that this kart was an actual racing kart. So when we put it on the ground with the idea of driving it on the grass, your bum was on the floor. So suddenly it was like, well, we can't drive around a garden or a field or something like that. So we discovered there was a track up at just outside Banbury and at Shennington, and went up there and took this contraption up there, and suddenly discovered that there was this whole world of kart race. You could race these things, and what we'd actually bought was a complete piece of shit. But it ignited a passion. And, suddenly that's life. My school career went out the window at that point. I don't know, it was just being at one with a machine and going as fast as you can, as fast as you dare, and then suddenly you're racing against other, kids as well, and trying to catch, trying to overtake. It was just that adrenaline buzz of speed. And then my childhood was then obsessed with going racing and polishing the go-kart in the garage and trying to understand. I slept with an engine in my bedroom for about 12 months, which absolutely stank. And I shared a bedroom with my younger brother at the time, and so he wasn't very happy about it. But yeah, it just ignited a passion in me, and all I wanted to do at that point was, be a driver. Still that passion, still that buzz. When the lights come on a Sunday afternoon, I still get the same energy as when the flag dropped when I was 12. There wasn't lights in those days. So it's still that adrenaline rush that you get from these high performing cars. And of course, the route that I went on, a big focus on being a driver, that detoured further down the line. But I think you've got to have that passion. And some people have it for different sports, different things. For me, it was the smell of the engines, it was the noise, it was the energy that they create, and that was like, wow, I want to be part. I think that ethic really came from my mum and dad, because they didn't come from affluent backgrounds, and they both worked really hard. And the one thing that they instilled, I've got two brothers, a younger and an older brother, and we're all very different characters, but the one thing that they instilled in all of us was that if you want to achieve something, you got to work hard for it. And my father was successful in what he was doing with the business he had. My mum was a teacher, and then she had other jobs because she wanted to achieve other things. So part of it's, I think, nature, and some of it's nurture, but certainly that ethic of, if you want something, you got to go out and earn it and achieve it. There was no sort of pocket money weekly. It was like, you want to earn some money, you go and earn some. Wash the cars and you can get a £1.50, I think it was in those days. I was fortunate that my parents were, they were supportive of us following our dreams, and they encouraged us always to think big, chase your dreams. Never just accept that we're just being one of a number. And we're all three very different characters. My older brother was the academic one, and he got the best school grades and went on to be a lawyer. My younger brother's a complete hooligan, and went a different path in life, but again equally successful because he had that drive. And for me, school rapidly became a social thing, because all I was thinking about was going racing. And of course, it was something I could share with my father, who had, he had an amateur's passion for the sport. He was from the motor industry, and it was something I could engage, with him over. And as I progressed through my teens, and we're racing around the UK, and it would be a family thing because we'd all go off, right, to Scotland or Northumbria or wherever the go-kart track was, as a family. And my brothers decided they didn't want to race, so some that they'd come and support me, or do some mechanicking, or make the sandwiches, or whatever it was. And as I progressed through sort of 15, 16, we started racing in Europe, and it was just a momentum that was building. And then suddenly there's this world of car racing, and that was what I wanted to do. And I made a deal with my mum and dad, because I wanted to leave school at 16 and just go racing. And I said, no, that's completely irresponsible. You've got to do your A-levels, and you have to get a place in university. And I had absolutely no intention of going anywhere near university. So I think on the form, I remember just sticking a pin in for where I wanted to go, and I think it was Aberystwyth or somewhere, it was. Anyway, so I stayed on and I did my A-levels. I managed to scrape through with just about enough grades to be able to go to the university if I wanted to. But I was already racing, in Formula Renault at that stage, and I got no intention of going anywhere near a university. In the end, it was relatively straightforward, because what happened was you set off on on this voyage. So I won a scholarship from racing karts. I'd finished in the top 3 in the UK in karting. I then won some races in Formula Renault, which was the gateway into the sport at that time. Then Formula 3 and things, and you'd thinking of being the next Nigel Mansell, and that's where my focus and dreams were at that stage. But I'd already started to recognise that at Formula 3, the guys I was going up against, they were just quite simply better than I was. And I managed to bring together a budget, because Formula or motor racing, unlike other sports, is very dependent on the budgets that you can put together, because you have to go and effectively pay for the service to drive for a team. And I didn't have enough money to go to a top team, so I made the decision that, well, why don't we buy the car, and at least we've got a car at the end of the year rather than a set of overalls and some pictures, and try and do it ourselves.
Yeah.
And so that's I taught my father into it.
That's quite entrepreneurial, though, isn't it?
I'd had to raise a lot of the sponsorship on my own. He'd given me, support with opening the doors and to some of his contacts, and I'd basically tapped up every schoolmate's dad, or who had a local business to sponsor me in my motor racing career, and the contacts that my father had, and I was fortunate in that respect. But I had to go out there and find the sponsorship, and so having done that, it was then a question of, well, rather than waste it with an average team, I may as well set this thing up, and then if it doesn't work, at least I've got something to fall back on. And I suppose the defining moment for me was even before the season had started at the beginning of 1998, was when I drove out the pit lane in Portugal, and there used to be a really high speed turn that was sort of one downshift straight into the corner. And there's barriers that are about 3 meters from the edge of the track. So if you're going to have a crash there, it was going to be a big one. And Juan Pablo Montoya came past me as I was coming out of the pit lane into this corner, and I could just see the angle that this car was at, the commitment that he had. The rim is trying to push its way through the tyre. And he just kept this thing absolutely planted. And I just knew that. I thought, I can't do that. My foot and brain,
interesting.
There's something between them that's saying, don't do it. And I knew.
Did you try and do it? Or?
In reality, I just knew that I haven't got the ability to disconnect the risk versus the commitment
reward
that it had. And so, low speed corners, fine, you could be as quick as anybody. The high speed stuff, whoa. And seeing his commitment there was an eye opener to me, to think, okay, you're not capable of doing that. Maybe it's time to start thinking about something.
That fascinates me, Christian, because a lot of people would often be that far in a career like you were. You put your neck out on the line, so you've got the sponsors, you back yourself by buying the car. Like, that hidden cost of time and investment in it is a difficult one to then step away from and maybe take a different angle.
I could have gone a different path. I could have gone and raced in America or Japan, or pursued other avenues. But I thought, do you know what? I've created this. I've created this team. I've driven for some good teams and driven for some not so good teams, and I'd like to develop this team how I would like to drive for it if I was, from a driver's perspective. And so it gave me an insight, albeit at a lesser level than anywhere near what our drivers are currently exposed to. But some of the emotions, the pressures, the isolation, the sense of team that, are so important. And for me, it was an invaluable education. So, when I first started out and created this little, what will be now Formula 2 team, I was having to do everything. So I was booking hotels, I was doing the VAT returns, I was paying the wages on every Friday, I was booking the fuel, paying for the spare parts, borrowing as much money from the bank, constantly speaking with them every week about being overdone on the overdraft. The credit card was maxed out for paying for tires, and it was a complete juggling act. But it was, I was washing the truck, getting the pizzas in the evening for the mechanics. So it was a tremendous education for me to go through that, just dealing with people and dealing with the pressures of running a little business. Because at the end of the day, I think there were 2 mechanics, a truck driver, and an engineer, and those 4 people depended on me to pay their mortgage. And that was a responsibility even at the age of 26. It's all about people. It's about working with people. It's about getting them to work together. It's about having the ability to engage with people at any level, whether it's from a sponsor to a truck driver, and having that ability to be approachable. And for me, that is something that's always been very important, that that nobody should feel that I don't want to talk to him, he's unapproachable, or, and so on. And I think when you've walked a mile in some of their shoes as well, and done bought the pizzas and washed the truck and washed wheels and so on, you've experienced some of what they're having to experience. And so you know what's required. But ultimately, I think just the skill set, and that went back to school. I was never the most academic at school. I wasn't the best sportsman either, and will give you popularity, but I just was able to get on with the geeky, clever guys, and also the ones that were a bit more on the spectrum as well. And I think that's just a life skill, to be honest with you. Doing common sense at the end of the day. I'm not an engineer. I don't have any engineering degrees. I couldn't tell you how the cars are built, even less so how an engine is built. But it's a people business, as most businesses are. And it's about getting a group of people together, empowering them, giving them the right direction, removing the obstacles to enable them to do their jobs and just focus on their job without being troubled by worrying about what somebody else is doing or what another department's doing. Well, I think 90% of people just want clarity and a clear communication. They don't want stuff sugarcoating. They just want to know what's the situation. Not a lot of people like small talk, and it's about just being clear. And I think that I've always tried very hard with whatever walk of life or position anybody's in, is just to have that clarity and the approachability. And I think that for me, that again is something that runs through this team, in that there's no room for egos here. It's all about team. It's all about working for each other. And not just as an individual, and I think that's made this team. It's one of the strengths that it's had. It's that sense of team, that sense of collectiveness. That we're all judged every 2 weeks on a Sunday afternoon, and every department needs to be working in harmony for the car to achieve that finish line in first position. Well, nobody ever turns around and says, well done, and I think that it can be a lonely position, because you've got an awful lot of responsibility. It consumes a huge percentage of your life. You've got accountability, and it's a pressure, and you learn to deal with that pressure, or you succumb to it. And I think that it's being able to manage and compartmentalize what's important at what point in time.
And do you ever feel overwhelmed by it?
I wouldn't say overwhelmed. There's days where you think, there's quite a bit on. But no, I think, look, it's. I remember in the early days, I flew to a hearing with the FIA with Ron Dennis because we were both in trouble for having not taken the start of the US Grand Prix. And he gave me a very useful bit of advice, which always stuck with me, which he said, look, I've always said to eat an elephant, you've got to do it, piece by piece. You're never going to do it in one sitting. You've got to just break it down and go one step at a time. And that always stuck with me, not because of the thought of Ron eating an elephant, but it was pertinent because I think with experience as well, you learn to worry about the things that you can control and not the things that you can't. You have to because you can't control everything. So focus on the things that you can rather than concern yourselves with the things that you can't. I was 31 years of age when I walked through the front door, and I was a kid.
Did you think you were a kid?
No, at that time, of course I didn't. I'd had success I'd won a championship for 3 years in a row in what is the understudy of Formula 1 now, Formula 2, Formula 3000 as it was known in those days. So I'd had an element, of success, and I walked in and it was just a much, much bigger environment than what I come from. So I thought, I'm just going to stick to all the same basics that served me well to win those championships in Formula 2 and apply them in Formula 1. And that is about, you surround yourself with the right people, empower those people, be clear in the objectives and what the expectations are, and try to remove the obstacles so that they can do their job. And when I first turned up here, I think there was complete dismay that they put some kid in charge. But there was a couple of guys, one that's still on the front end of Max's car that had also graduated from Formula 2 or Formula 3000 that knew me. And they were tremendously supportive at that time. DC, who was our driver, I knew from those years back go-kart racing, and he was a familiar face, and he was someone that I could bounce ideas off because he'd driven for Williams, he'd driven for McLaren, and he'd come to Red Bull. So he was somebody that I said, I don't understand what on earth these guys are talking about, even the language they're using. I don't. And he said, well, neither do I. And I've just come from McLaren. So I'm thinking, okay, we need to break things. The whole factory was pulled together. And it was announced to them that the previous management, because Red Bull had only bought Jaguar at the end of 2004, and this was beginning of January 2005. They were all bought together. And basically, the current team principal had been fired that morning. The company had been brought together, and this is, Christian Horner. He's now going to be the new team principal. And there was a sort of a look of shock as I looked out at this sea of faces and thinking, who's this kid that they've left me? So I went back to, what was my office. I had a secretary in tears because her previous boss had just been fired. I got his Christmas cards on the desk, his coffee cup half drunk. And it was like, okay, so this is the start. Wow. This is the start. And a pretty disgruntled workforce that all went home at 5 o'clock. I think in protest. So it was then a question, right, okay, I've got to learn about this team, the people, understand its strengths and weaknesses, and that was really what I set about the next 6 months doing, was just looking, listening, talking to people, getting to know and understand the business.